I have to applaud Dr. Chenard in this movie. While there are so many men out there who date women of conventional beauty, he loves Julia, not just in spite of, but seemingly because of the fact that she doesn't have skin. I think I'm gonna cry.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Hellbound Hellraiser 2 follows the character of Kirsty, who managed to escape hell in the first movie, but through a series of events involving a mad psychiatrist who wants to explore that other dimension, Kirsty ends up going into hell to rescue her father, but she may end up becoming a permanent resident. Now, as of filming this review, it is the day of Friday the 13th, and you may be wondering why I'm not reviewing one of the Friday the 13th movies. I've already stated in my announcement video that I genuinely believe the original Friday the 13th is the best film in the series. However, for those of you who hunger for even the most tenuous connection, in the movie Hellraiser Hellworld, we see Pinhead acting more physical, chopping people's heads off with meat cleavers and such. So according to that movie, he's essentially the same thing as Jason. Don't watch Hellworld though, it's horrible. By far my favorite thing about this movie is how it takes the audience into new territory by actually exploring the world of hell. And instead of seeing your stereotypical hell where it's all just fire and brimstone, a bunch of reds and oranges with demons running around, hell is just this dark, endless labyrinth in which you never know what's around the corner, and each person as an individual has to suffer their own worst fate imaginable for the rest of eternity. And of course, the demons, otherwise known as Cenobites in these movies, are very visually interesting. You've got these creatures that have been mangled and mutilated so much that they just barely resemble human beings, and ultimately that's a lot more disturbing to look at than just horned demons with fangs. This film has some fairly interesting characters too, like it introduces this one girl who is completely obsessed with puzzles. She's the one who solves the puzzle box and opens the doors to hell, and her personal hell is pretty much the creepiest and the most heartbreaking featured in the movie. Honestly, I would have liked to know a little bit more about her backstory, but at the same time, it could have been one of those cases where less is more, since the movie is more about the journey of Kirsty as well as the villains. Speaking of villains, those of you who are less familiar with the Hellraiser series may not know this, but in at least the first couple films of the series, Pinhead is not the main bad guy. He's not a good guy by any standard. I wouldn't want to meet him, but all in all, he's really just a guy doing his job. One of the main villains in this film, who was also in the first film, is Kirsty's former stepmother, Julia. Whereas in the first film, she was more codependent and she was basically just a reluctant partner in crime, she has clearly changed since going to hell. In this movie, she is much more confident, she's more in command, and she doesn't really depend on anyone. She just enjoys watching people suffer. Also, there's the psychiatrist I mentioned earlier, Dr. Chenard. Honestly, I would rather have Hannibal Lecter as my doctor than this guy. Chenard just comes off as a complete sociopath, and what a lot of people would find disgusting and untouchable, he finds to be absolutely fascinating, and in some cases he may even want to put his dick in it. I'm not even exaggerating much. This movie does have its imperfections though. For example, when it comes to the special effects, most of them look pretty great. I mean, This film looks like it was made for a much bigger budget than it actually was on the whole. However, there are a couple of little moments where the low budget shows. For example, there's a point where Kirsty is leaning against this brick wall in the Hell Labyrinth, and you can see the wall kind of shaking like it's made of paper. Also, I feel like this film has too many flashbacks in it to the first movie. At the very beginning, you get this whole sequence where it's retreading what happened previously, and then a little bit later, Kirsty is recounting the events of the first movie, and I feel like that scene where she was telling someone what happened could have been the only part that involved flashbacks. They could have just cut out the first minute or two. Also, there are a few people, including myself, who have an issue with the ending of this movie, with the direction that they take the Cenobites. And I understand the direction they were going for. I've listened to the commentary for this movie, but at the same time, they should have gone for something less underwhelming. It feels like they kind of dropped the ball. Most importantly, however, this film features a labyrinth in it, and there is no point where David Bowie makes an appearance. That is a fail. I'm just kidding, that would have been really silly, but come on, you could have had David Bowie in your movie. In the end, unlike the Eye 2, the ending of this movie wasn't enough to bring it apart for me. I still found it very enjoyable as a whole. If you're interested in seeing something genuinely creepy and disturbing with a different take on hell than what you're used to seeing in the media, then Hellbound Hellraiser 2 does come highly recommended. And that's all I've got to say about this movie. I hope y'all have a good one.